All right. How's it going, everyone? So, the trend seems to be that basically I will not be going live and talking about things in any kind of coordinated way. I thought I was just going to go live once a month where I interview someone interesting, and it seems like I've been pulled into this world of going live just sporadically when something comes up that's interesting or worth discussing. So this is Dr. Patrick Lockwood. I'm a clinical psychologist here in Los Angeles. I'm the author of a book called The Fear Problem, which is worth checking out on Amazon and at Mascot Books. Thank you very much to Mascot Books for getting that published. So those are kind of my bona fides, so to speak. I watched a video, an engaging video by Dave Rubin on the Rubin Report, and I thought it would be worth discussing some of the things that Dave and his guest Kyle Kashuv, one of the kids who survived the Parkland experience, even though he very honestly said, I wasn't actually in the building where the violence was occurring, which is, it's good that he's honest about that. Kid's a conservative. He appears to be part of a number of conservative groups and that crowd. And they spoke about a number of things. They spoke about gun laws. They spoke about solutions to the gun violence in school problem. They spoke about politics. They spoke about a number of things. And I just wanted to throw my 2 cents at Dave and Kyle and anyone else who's listening. I welcome any critiques, positive ideas, negative ideas. You can call me a racist if you want for the fun of it. I don't know. I don't care. But I have some thoughts that I think I sort of agree with some of what the two of them said on the show. I think they posted this video 2 days ago on the Rubin Report. But again, I watched it. It was very good. It was about an hour. It was a good chat between the two of them. Dave's a great interviewer. I have some thoughts where I agree. I have some thoughts where I disagree. And I think it'd be important to, let's say, pull apart some of the things that Kyle specifically said. It seemed like Dave took more of a back seat, so I don't have as much to say about, in terms of disagreement about what he said. So the things that I agree about, obviously media bias is a huge problem, and the kid said that media sensationalism and just looking for the kids that were crying outside of the school is gross, and I agree, that's extremely gross. They're more interested in making money and getting people's emotions worked up than they are about reporting facts or just being compassionate to the people who just went through something traumatic. I'm a clinical psychologist. If someone just experienced the trauma, the last fucking thing they need is a camera being shoved in their face. So just one point of clarity there. You can tell I'm not pleased with that idea because it's just bad. It's wrong. You can ask any psychologist who's worth their salt. If someone's just witnessed a horrific crime, you don't shove a camera in their face. The second thing that I agree with is the idea that Dave basically said that, you know, the Second Amendment thing is a complex thing. Another thing I agree with that they were talking about is that, you know, 15-year-olds shouldn't have the right to vote. So I'm not a political scholar. I don't have a lot of, let's say, wisdom or experience in the world of politics, so I don't have a lot of room to speak, but from the point of view of clinical psychology and the developing brain, I can speak a little bit. So it's idea that a 15-year-old has the frontal white matter interconnections to their midbrain to deal with their feelings in a way like an adult would. So from a neuroscience perspective, adolescents are not nearly as neuronally integrated as adults are, which means that they cannot process and manage feelings and, let's say, juggle multiple emotional balls at once without losing their minds. Now, that's not to say that adults are doing much better nowadays. In fact, most adults on TV and online and social media are acting like fucking children. They're just responding and reacting and acting just totally worse than kids. In fact, this Kyle Kashuv kid did a very good job of not losing his emotions at all when he was chatting with Dave. I mean, he's a little young and not perfectly articulate, but he did a very, very good job of just being very straightforward about what he believed. So the idea that a 15-year-old who is not nearly as, let's say, detached and who is more, let's say, immature neurodevelopmentally could vote and make reasonable, well-informed decisions about ideas and concepts that are very, very complex that even senators don't understand is kind of silly. I don't think that makes sense. Plus, they don't understand history. Plus, 15-year-olds don't understand the world. They haven't lived in it. This is a point that Jordan Peterson makes all the time, is that what the hell do you know? You haven't lived outside of mommy and daddy's house at all, basically, or at least most kids haven't. I mean, if they can't drink at 15 and they can't really drive at 15, why in the world would they be able to vote? So we don't trust them with cars. We don't trust them with guns. We don't trust them with alcohol, but we'll trust them with the choice to elect someone and think critically when their brain's not built for that yet. It's being developed for that, but it's not built for that yet. Another thing I agree with that they were talking about with regard to guns and that part of the discussion, it seems like, Dave is right when he says basically it's impossible to manage all of the things related to guns and their issues and their consequences. But it is reasonable to create some reasonable laws and try and enforce them better. Finally, another thing I agree with is that censorship is counterproductive. Towards the end of the video, they started talking about conservatives and censorship. And as many of you know who watched this, I just experienced, I think, a little bit of this, even though I'm not conservative, which is funny. But yeah, censorship is definitely not productive online. No matter what private business you're a part of, if you want to keep things toasty and you want to keep people engaged and you want to keep people feeling supported, you want to let them speak. Speech is very, very important, regardless. Whether they're right or they're wrong, they're stupid or they're smart, speech is important. Here's some things I disagree with in the video, and I think this is where I hope for some helpful debate or not so helpful debate, we'll see. But I welcome any and all thoughts about this. So Kyle was on there talking a lot about how the gun laws that we have are perfectly effective, basically. We have all the gun laws that we need, is what Kyle said. And I didn't hear Dave really push on that, which is interesting. I don't know why. I think that talking about gun laws when it comes to gun violence is neither necessary nor sufficient, because I don't think that it's about the number of gun laws or the type of gun laws that we have. I think they're right when they say the enforcement of them is important, but I think they're wrong when they're missing facts about what humans are capable of doing and how we're designed. And this is a common trend and a common theme for me. It's why I wrote the book, The Fear Problem, because I don't think people really acknowledge or grasp how primitive we are. We are not as sophisticated as we seem. We are not as nice as we sound. And I think taking that into account when it comes to our gun laws is an important thing. I'm not a politician. I'm not a forensic expert, so I can't really speak to anything in a literature sense, but I can speak to, again, basic neuropsychology and evolutionary psychology. We're not that simple. We're not that simple that one broad gun law is going to be enough, which is, again, back to Dave's point that it's impossible to manage everything related to gun laws and gun violence, but we can make some reasonable laws and then try and enforce them better. That's one good point. I think it's not enough. And maybe my next few disagreements will clarify what more could be done. So Kyle Kashuv said that making sure more people will be armed will be the main issue. I highly disagree. I think that's, although I think that might be helpful and effective in a number of ways, I don't think that will be the final solution, so to speak, or the primary solution. I think we have cultural issues and emotional issues that we're not discussing. We're not discussing cultural issues related to beliefs about violence. They mentioned the microaggression and victim mentality and stuff like that on Dave's show. And if you talk more about those issues and resolve some of those issues, help people feel heard and understood in their pain, this might actually dissipate. We might have fewer gun incidents if we can just help these people who feel disempowered and disenfranchised feel heard and understood, as opposed to shoving them to the wayside. This is why the social justice warrior movement has gained such speed and such steam for the last decade, because the people who felt disenfranchised and disempowered finally have half of the country who's willing to let them have a platform and a megaphone. So if we do the same thing for the people who really are disempowered now, like kids who are being bullied all the time, kids who are being shamed for their sexual or gender identity, kids who are being abused by their parents and no one's paying attention to them, etc. Kids who are being neglected. If we pay attention to those kids and give them more of a voice and help them feel understood and feel seen, as in the opposite of shame, then we might actually have a better chance of decreasing gun violence. And we might actually have a better chance of decreasing a cultural level of, let's say, verbal violence, as the left likes to call it, microaggressions and whatnot. We just need to listen to each other more. We don't fucking do that. We need to. Let's just listen. That's why I like Dave. Dave just likes to listen. And he does a good job of just letting people talk and be themselves. That's very, very useful. As a clinician, that's half of what I do all day long. So that I think is the primary or main issue, not arming people. You can arm people and we can experiment and see how that goes, but I don't think that's going to solve jack. His point about Kyle's point specifically, Kyle Kashuv made the point that we shouldn't let the CDC do research on gun violence because they are biased in how they present facts, etc. So I think that's partially ignorance and partially true. So I think there's probably some truth that, you know, the CDC might have a bias, whatever. I have a bias. I have a bias towards mental health, and that's the thing that I'm pitching right now. That's normal. That's part of statistics and it's part of research. I mean, everyone has a research agenda. That's how it works. Now, to the idea that we shouldn't do research, no. That's bad. The more we can get objective eyes, even if they have a little bit of bias, but if we can get more scientists, social scientists, looking at these concepts, we can duke it out in the research. The best place for these concepts to be understood and explored is not in the Senate and the House. My opinion, obviously because I have a bias as a professor and as a guy who engages in research and clinical psychology, the best place for us to duke it out over gun control is in the scientific community. Let us study it. Let us study different ideas. Let's do some randomized controlled clinical trials, etc., with different gun policies and see how it goes. At least we can do it in a controlled way, in a thoughtful way, checking for our biases, and then letting the scientific community go, well, your bias is here, and you didn't acknowledge that, and you failed to account for that, and that, and that, and that. Therefore, your result is crap. That is a better discussion than putting something into law which can affect millions of people, and then going, oops, we should have thought about that more thoroughly. Why don't we measure 50 or 60 times before we cut the wood, right? Let science do that. And as biased as they are, there will be people like myself and Jordan and others and Brett and all sorts of people, Brett Weinstein, Jordan Peterson, who are going to fight for what the science actually says. So let science duke it out first. Maybe the CDC is not the best organization. Maybe it's the NIH, the NIMH, the NIDA, whatever. But let science duke it out first, then let's make some law. Why don't we think critically? Kyle said on the show a number of times he's most interested in the facts. Well, he's not interested in getting research-based facts if he's not interested in people doing research. So let's do some research. I will gladly volunteer to, write a scholarly paper on this and engage in some research on this. Gladly. If anyone wants to take me up on that, gladly. And I think that his position is slightly dangerous if he's interpreted in the broadest possible way, which is that we shouldn't do gun research. So just to clarify, his point about the CDC being biased and we shouldn't let people do gun research, that I don't like. That I disagree with because I think it's dangerous. We need to let more science happen and less public debate happen about that. Let the science go first, then let the people debate, then let the lawmakers make laws. That seems like the logical order of operations for me. And maybe it's just because he's young and he doesn't have a lot of experience with this part of the world. I don't know. Or maybe he just hasn't thought about it. Doesn't matter. And my final disagreement um, with stuff that was said in the Dave Rubin and Kyle Kashuv video 2 days ago is about the idea that mental health is not something to think about. And he said that there's basically no objective standard by which we should limit gun use by people in terms of mental health. And that's not true at all. And I think, maybe Jordan Peterson or other people would say differently, but I'm pretty sure we have some objective cutoffs by which we say, no, you can no longer have guns because we know for a fact you're dangerous or you're more likely to be dangerous. And the first place I have 3 points. The first point is in California state law, they use this phrase, a reasonable person in that circumstance, a reasonable clinician would do the same thing, would make the same judgment or determination. So I know for a fact in my very short but busy career that I have a lot of experience dealing with angry people, angry clients, angry at your spouse, angry at the law, angry at the world, angry at Donald Trump, angry at everyone. And I can reasonably assess, because of my training in mental health and assessing for emotions and my very deep understanding of emotional well-being and the evolutionary psychology and neurobiological components of emotions and their set points and allostasis and all sorts of good stuff, that we have a limit to what we can tolerate before we snap. And I think reasonable clinicians are decent at assessing for when someone is potentially violent. And most of the time in our profession, we err on the side of caution, and we will make some kind of legal report if we think someone's at risk of being harmed. So that's the first response. The second response is we clearly have an objective cutoff for who can't have guns in the state of California, at least, as evidenced by the Welfare and Institution Codes 5150, 5250, and 5450, in terms of if you are gravely disabled or you are being put on a hold, what we call a hold, due to intellectual disability, drug and alcohol use, or some kind of psychotic or other mental health issue, that means you can't function on your own. So you could put on a 72-hour hold or longer, depending upon the degree of impairment and the nature of the cause, and whether or not you try to advocate to get released from the hold. So in the state of California, you cannot own a gun for at least 5 years if you get put on a hold. So our objective criteria for saying you can't have guns because you are a legitimate threat is if, because of drugs, mental illness, or intellectual disability, you're gravely disabled and you are unfit to take care of yourself. So you get hospitalized or institutionalized. Those are objective criteria because your brain is not functioning well enough. You are not able to manage your feelings well enough that you can't take care of your shelter, your food, your basic needs, or you're emotionally volatile. That's an objective cutoff, Kyle. We have it. And we need to use it more, I think. I could be wrong. Maybe the standards are too stringent. I don't know. I could be wrong, right? You could say that this could easily slip. It could be a slippery slope to maybe we don't let veterans with PTSD have guns because they have the potential to be violent, right? That's a slippery slope that's reasonable to discuss. But we do have an objective standard. So the mental health argument with regard to guns is very, very important. And obviously I'm biased, but we have years of law on the books and years of research in the literature that you can check out that shows that X kind of brain, let's say, dysfunction is correlated with violence. That's not complicated. Now, it's not to say that those people are bad or that they should never have guns. It's just to say that, at least for 5 years, which is reasonable, that those people need to get stable. They need to learn how to manage their feelings, understand the issues that got them to the point where they were put on a hold, and maybe learn how to reintegrate into society in a better way so they can function more adaptively. Then they might be able to be responsible with guns, as in not a threat. And the third objective criteria, or mostly objective criteria, is if you're a felon in the state of California. So felons in the state of California cannot do a number of things. Specifically, you cannot have a gun or ammunition according to PC 29800. It's a felony offense if you yourself are a convicted felon, any prior felony offense, if you have 2 or more misdemeanors related to guns, if you are addicted to drugs of abuse. Those three reasons. It is a felony offense to have a gun, as in we think it's unacceptable to have a gun. If you're addicted to narcotics, if you have 2 or more misdemeanors for weapons charges, or you have a prior felony offense. So basically, the third objective criteria is significant antisocial behavior. So a preponderance of antisocial behavior. Now, obviously, one of the great comebacks is people who deal pot are convicted of felony offenses. And that's a fair, pot's a Schedule I drug. For what reason, I have no clue. I've made that clear in other videos. So yeah, that's a reasonable comeback. But the reality is, if you're addicted to drugs, you are, I can say definitively, based upon my years of clinical practice, my understanding of the literature, that your brain is messed up. You do not have the self-control, the volitional ability to manage your feelings and your behavior in an adaptive way. That's a reasonable law. That's a reasonable law. Now, does it make sense that you should never have a gun if you're addicted to drugs? No. No, absolutely. If you get clean and one of your hobbies is you like to practice shooting or you like to hunt or whatever, great. But again, just like the 5-year rule, if you're put on a psychiatric hold, maybe it just needs to be that. But the point of the matter is we have 3 objective criteria. If a clinician determines that it's some kind of danger to the world, if you're put on a hold and there's a 5-year period because of those 3 issues, or if you're significantly antisocial, as evidenced by having prior felony offense, 2 or more gun-related misdemeanor charges, or if you're addicted to drugs of abuse. So, Kyle, those are the 3 objective mental health criteria by which I would say we can have a rational conversation about gun control. And I think we should focus more on that than on arming people or not arming people. I think the concept of taking away guns or adding guns is neither here nor there. I think the concept of who is really dangerous in the first place is more important to discuss. And maybe Ben Shapiro would disagree, maybe Jordan would disagree, maybe Brett Weinstein would disagree. I'm sure plenty of you disagree with what I'm saying, but we have objective criteria. Whether you're interested in them or not, whether the NRA likes them or not, that's fine. But as a clinician, as a licensed clinician, as someone who understands the brain better than I imagine most of you watching, I imagine that it'd be very, very difficult to come up with a counter argument against that. But I would welcome any and all counter argument. In fact, I think the more we discuss the mental health, emotion regulation side of this process, I think the chances are good, significantly better, that we have less violence in this country. So these are my thoughts on the Dave Rubin video. Dave, on the Rubin Report, met with Kyle Kashuv, talked about gun control and conservative politics and all sorts of stuff like that. Don't really care about the politics side, but again, can't help but talk about it at this point. I welcome any and all comments, any and all thought, any and all debate. Positive, negative, doesn't matter. And I will hopefully be talking to you all again. I mean, I guess randomly, sporadically when something else comes up. But at this point, I hope to have some kind of other healing practitioner on, whether it's in the vein of yoga or mindfulness. I don't know. I hope to have someone else on by the end of this month. I'll keep you all abreast of what happens with that. And I look forward to seeing you in a couple of weeks or sooner. Have a great rest of your Sunday and have a good day.